about like the public health
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw that.
or schools or whatever.
I call this meeting to order for the Board of Trustees of the town of Buena Vista. Can I have roll call, please?
Mayor Lacy.
Here.
Trustee Fang. Here. Trustee LaCretzi.
Here.
Trustee Nyberg.
Here.
Trustee Rowe.
Here.
Trustee Swisher.
Here.
Trustee Wilkie.
Will you all please join me in the pledge of allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you all for joining us. I remind you to please turn off or silence your cell phone. Next, we have a proclamation. The Arbor Day proclamation, whereas 72, J. Sterling Morton proposed to the Nebraska Board of Agriculture that a special day be set aside for planting of trees. And whereas this holiday called Arbor Day was first observed with the planting of more than 1 million trees in Nebraska. And whereas Arbor Day is now observed throughout the nation and the world, and whereas trees can reduce the erosion of our precious topsoil by wind and water, cutting heating and cooling costs, moderate the temperature, clean the air, produce life-giving oxygen, and provide habitat for wildlife. And whereas trees are a renewable resource, giving us paper, wood for our homes, fuel for our fires, and countless other wood products. And whereas trees in our city increase property values, enhance the economic vitality of business areas, and beautify our community. And whereas trees, wherever they are planted, are a source of joy and spiritual renewal. Now, therefore, I, Duff Lacey, Mayor of the City of Buena Vista, do hereby proclaim May 18th, 2022 as Arbor Day in the city of Buena Vista, Colorado. And I urge all citizens to celebrate Arbor Day and to support efforts to protect our trees and woodlands. Further, I urge all citizens to plant trees to gladden the heart and promote the well-being of this and future generations. Dated the 22nd of February, 2022. Next item is the agenda adoption. Do I have any additions, deletions on the agenda? Hearing none, I'd entertain a motion.
Make a motion to up the agenda.
Second, Fay. Further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you all very much. Next item is consent agenda. Do I have any questions or comments on consent agenda?
Question,
Trustee
if
Volpe.
I may. I'm not sure if this belongs on the consent agenda or if we can talk about staff interaction, but I was reading the Historic Preservation Commission comments. And one of the business items was a 371 railroad tunnel discussion. I know it's for the county, but is it tunnels?
I was surprised too.
Yeah.
There was a discussion that was brought by a historic preservation commissioner in response to something they heard about a discussion in a county commission meeting about a question being raised around the cost of maintaining tunnels. So it was posed as a question in the HPC meeting, not as a major topic of discussion. Does that clarify?
It does, I guess. I would hope that we'd be notified of any major discussion of demoing or improving.
As a sort of aside, I guess, since then, we've gotten confirmation from county commissioners that they do not intend on demolishing it.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
I think it was a confusion.
All right, thank you. See,
Let's hope it was a confusion.
Yeah.
That's really a strange one for me. Yes, I understand where they're coming from, but I don't. Interesting. Thank you, Dave. Any other questions or comments on the consent agenda? I would entertain a motion.
I make the motion to approve the consent agenda.
Thank you.
Second.
Second, Swisher. Discussion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you all very much. Next item on the agenda is public comment. Remind everyone that you may press *9 if you're on the phone, and the host will prompt you to unmute. Or in the Zoom chat box, you may raise your hand. We've got a couple.
Two identified so far, Michael Hannigan. First. Give him over. Michael, or somebody out in the interwebs, if you can help me move Michael Hannigan over to speak.
All right, I've allowed Michael to talk.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you, Michael. Please state your name and address.
Michael Hannigan. I'm at 115 River Run Court here in Buena Vista.
Thank you.
Are you ready?
Go ahead. Yes.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. I'm here representing those members of Sangre de Cristo Electric Association who live in the BV service area. We understand that you're getting ready to renew the franchise agreement between the town of BV and Sangre. We want you to be aware that we're very disappointed in the way Sangre has developed the new rate structure, slated to begin April 1st, partly because the company did not ask for input from its members before it decided on the rate changes. As a cooperative, Sangre is required to be a democratic organization controlled by its members who actively participate in setting policies and making decisions. Directors on the board are accountable to members and must keep them informed. A cooperative should work for the sustainable development of its community through policies supported by the membership. The rate changes that Sangre has adopted were discussed in executive session behind closed doors, and they were based on a cost of service study that Sangre has still not shared with its members. In fact, for one of the most important decisions in the co-op's recent history, the board and the staff at Sangre have virtually ignored their members. So there's a new organization called the Arkansas Valley Coalition for a Sustainable Energy Future. Yes, it's a mouthful, but it's full of hundreds of passionate people from across the Sangre service area, Chaffee County, Lake County, Fremont County, Custer County. We would hope that in renewing a franchise agreement with Sangre, the town of BV can incorporate some language that strongly encourages a more democratic approach by Sangre and its leaders. While we understand that you cannot dictate how Sangre runs its business, you can encourage them to act in good faith. After all, we members pay the franchise fee. We have another idea that we would like you to consider. The energy landscape is changing so rapidly that it seems like a 25-year franchise agreement will outlive the big changes that the town of BV and the electric company might need to make. We respectfully request that you consider a shorter agreement so that we all have some room and leverage for future innovations with an eye toward cleaner energy and sustainability for BV and for our valley. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael.
Yes. Yes.
Do we have another one, Philip?
Yes, Daniel Tom, I believe, is on from the county, and he offered to share just a little bit about the tunnels.
Oh. Interesting.
Somehow the tunnels.
How did he know?
He's on the call. Let's see.
All right, yeah, and I've promoted Daniel to talk.
Great.
Hi, everyone. Daniel Tom, County Attorney's Office, Chaffee County, 104 Crestone. Got on a little bit late, was here actually for the Stackhouse Annexation, but heard that there was kind of questions about rehabbing the tunnels. I can tell you the county, I mean, I think the question was asked about rehabbing and possibly about any other ways to rehab the tunnels, but the county is actively looking at rehabbing the tunnels. We have engineering out to shotcrete and basically stabilize the tunnels. I think we're looking at least the 2 tunnels. If I recall correctly, there's 2 tunnels that are in dire need of work. And then we're also taking costs for rehabbing all of them. So we could do it at the same time. I believe, I don't know what the time frame is, but I'm sure Mark Stacy, our road and bridge supervisor, would work with the town about road closures and everyone there. Because I believe this would take significant road closures and detours for people around. But I can't recall what the time schedule was, but I know they were trying to do it during off season also to lessen the impact. Any questions? But that's kind of my recollection. I know we're still working on finalizing the RFP and the bids out for the work.
Okay, thank you very much, Daniel. That helps.
Yeah, I didn't want that rumor to get out.
All right, appreciate it.
No problem.
Do you have more there, Philip?
I am not seeing any others at this time.
Okay, I close public comment. First item on the agenda is public hearing. A public hearing on the Terrace on Main Street Tavern liquor license. The board will consider approving a tavern liquor license for the Terrace on Main Street. I open the public hearing. I would like to hear from staff first.
Good evening, Mayor and trustees. As outlined in your packet, Grace First LLC doing business is Terrace on Main. Mary Molitor and Matt Snow Manager submitted an application for a tavern liquor license. The application is complete and the appropriate fees have been paid. The application was set for a hearing this evening and all the public notices have been published and the signs posted on the property. The Terrace on Main will be located on the rooftop of the Remax building located on the corner of East Main and South Colorado Avenue. Molitor and Snow project construction should be completed late May and planned to open in June of 2022. Proof of possession of the premises have been provided. The town's planning department and Chaffey County Development Services have reviewed the building plans and specifications accurately represent the facilities. The premises comply with applicable zoning. The police chief, principal planner, and code enforcement officer have given their approval for the license, and approval from Chaffey County Fire Protection District and Chaffey County Environmental Services are pending completion of the construction. Background checks were submitted for Molitor and Snow and satisfactory results were received. A needs and desires petition of the neighborhood has been circulated within the town of Buena Vista. If approved, this license would not appear to be a detriment to the neighborhood and is in the boundaries of the distance from the school. Staff recommends that the board conditionally approve the tavern liquor license as applied for by Grace First LLC doing business as Terrace on Main, located at 330 East Main Street with the following conditions. Construction of the rooftop bar, certificate of occupancy issued by the Chaffey County Development Services Department, certificate of occupancy issued by the town of Buena Vista, final inspection and approval from Chaffey County Fire Protection District, final inspection and approval from Chaffey County Environmental Health. The town clerk will license until all conditions have been met.
Trustees, do you have any clarifying questions for staff? Do we have the applicant on board?
I do see Matt Snow on. Matt, I'm going to promote you to panelist in case you would like to share anything as the applicant.
I heard you say, I didn't hear you finish, Philip.
Yeah, sorry, Matt. I just wanted, I made you a panelist. So if you wanted to say anything about your application, you can do so now.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm not entirely sure, other than we are excited. We are interested in meeting both the needs of tourism in our town, as well as serving in a local capacity and being generous to our locals from the rooftop bar, as well as particularly hosting some events and things like that. And so mostly just in the planning stages and excitement and brainstorming and ready for this adventure to start, hopefully this summer.
Thank you, Matt. Trustees, do you have any questions for the applicant?
When
Yes, Libby, go ahead.
when do they expect to open?
So we're hearing that construction ought to be done by May. And so we are saying June.
Right. You don't know this about me, but I have a fondness for rooftop bars.
You're invited. Maybe you can be our first customer.
Any other questions?
I guess I have one. Go ahead, Dave. Not sure. Just this license or licenses going forward, but I'm reading Chief Morgan's comments about the tips training and the compliance issues in our local establishments. And I'm wondering if you have plans for tips trainings for your servers.
Yeah, so Paula forwarded me that information yesterday, and I did read that, and absolutely, I'm 100% on board. There's a bit of a learning curve for all of us in this, so I was happy for that comment, and looked into the tips training, and absolutely would love to present certification to whomever would like to see it, and to make sure we're both in compliance, but as he said in the comment, setting a good example right from the start.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Anything else for Matt? Okay, thank you, Matt.
Thank you.
I close this portion. Oh, excuse me, I open for public comment. If there's anybody in the public who would like to make a comment, I open up this meeting for public comment. Again, I remind you, you can raise your hand in the Zoom chat box or press *9 if you're joining us by phone. We will recognize you, or if you're sitting, never mind. What do you got, Mark?
I already used mine up.
I don't see anything to look
I'm not
at.
seeing anything either, man.
Okay, I close public comment. Any other clarifying questions before I close that portion of the public hearing? Okay, trustees, thoughts, comments, motion?
So the license will be held until those inspections are approved.
Yep.
So we don't need to approve with them.
So we would be conditionally approving, basically. Yep.
But that wouldn't change how we would make the motion.
I'll make the motion that we approve it.
Thank you, Norm.
Second.
Second, McFezzi. Further discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Trustee Fay,
Yes.
trustee McCratsy,
Yes.
trustee Nyberg,
Yes.
trustee Rowe,
Yes.
trustee Swisher,
Yes.
trustee Wilkie.
Yes.
Thank you all very much. Good luck, Matt. Next item, another public hearing. This is a continuation of the updates to the unified, boy, am I having a rough night tonight. Unified Development Code, UDC. Should the Board of Trustees approve the adoption of Ordinance Number 6, Series 2022, entitled An Ordinance Amending Certain Sections of Title 16 of the Buena Vista Municipal Code concerning large multifamily dwellings in the Highway Commercial District. I believe Joseph.
Thank you for the floor. Okay, I'll drive. So excited to be back before you for this continued public hearing from our start on this topic on January 25th. And then we presented a brief update on our last meeting, February 8th. So the presentation that I want to walk through briefly here is the same one that you saw at our last meeting. And I welcome additional questions. Both Mark and I are willing to answer any detailed questions you have on these two proposed amendments to the UDC. Similar to the two that we brought to you last meeting, we are separating these, and we have separated these in your packets into two different motions or potential board actions. The first one that we'll talk about is the amendment to proposed amendment to the Highway Commercial Zone District, which would offer a path to an exemption from the requirement to have mixed use commercial as part of your building. The second one we'll talk about is the creation of a new use in our Unified Development Code called single room occupancy. We will ask for action on each of these separately. Wanted to remind you all of the criteria that we all use when we're proposing and considering amendments to the UDC. We don't need to go through each one of these, but I want to encourage you to keep these in mind. We can revisit these or go back to these if we need to during the discussion. So as a reminder, this topic has been brought about through a variety of different reasons. Two primary ones. One is our desire as a town for more and diverse types of housing. Currently in the highway commercial zone district, an owner of the property can choose to build multifamily buildings, but they have to have commercial component the first story or as part of the mixed use component of that building. So there's currently no option for someone to build a standalone apartment building in the highway commercial zone district. What we're proposing is essentially the option to seek an exemption from that mixed use requirement. So keep in mind that even if this amendment were approved, the applicants for any sort of standalone apartment building would still need to not only demonstrate compliance with the exemption criteria, but also seek a special use permit. So that project would come back before the Planning and Zoning Commission and be heard in the public sphere. So even with this approval, there would still be public process required of any of these projects. So as we'll look at in a moment, there are a variety of parcels in the highway commercial zone district, which both currently and potentially in the future might not be suitable for commercial activities. And therefore that requirement as it currently stands to include a commercial component in a building poses an insurmountable barrier. When a developer is looking at doing a multifamily project, but they have to build commercial space, especially on some of these properties where commercial activity might not be viable, that means that the project just won't move forward. So this opportunity, this amendment would allow them the route through a special use permit and by agreeing to a couple of conditions to build standalone multifamily buildings, either small or large. And as a reminder, small multifamily is 4 units or less, large multifamily is 5 units or more. If you remember on January 25th, when we brought this before you, some of the comments that we heard back from you were concern about the ability for developers to potentially gain a fourth story through a density bonus. So the version of the ordinance that you had before you actually has eliminated that possibility. So this means that if someone wants to be exempted from the requirement to build commercial space, they must prohibit the condominiumization of any more than 30% of the apartment units they create. So at a bare minimum, in order to gain this exemption, they would have to be guaranteeing that we're going to see a net gain of long-term rental housing. Then, if they want to reduce the amount of parking they would be required to build, commit to deed restrictions of at least 120% AMI or less, as well as being pet friendly or allowing pets. So it's sort of a two-tiered proposal. The first, in order to be able to not build commercial space, they have to at least commit to giving the town a net gain of permanent long-term housing. Then if they want to reduce the amount of parking they can build, they additionally have to agree to deed restrictions for affordability. So I just want to be clear that there are two ideas here. One is long-term housing, regardless of affordability, and the other then is affordability in exchange for a parking reduction. So just to be clear, there's no longer a height density bonus as there was in the original proposal that was brought before you. The only bonus that a developer can seek now is a parking reduction in exchange for affordability. As I mentioned, our comprehensive plan asks us to use all appropriate methods for creating affordable and diverse housing options like multifamily. As you all know, the ability and the existence of multifamily in our town right now is pretty limited. The ability to find not only zone districts that allow it, but also property that's suitable for it is limited. And so this is one example of an opportunity we're using to promote multifamily housing options. And under goal 3 in our comprehensive plan, it asks us to identify zone districts where we can achieve greater density. So explicitly, our comprehensive plan is pointing us towards finding opportunities to increase density, recognizing that with increased density, we lower the per unit cost of housing. So this is a perfect example where currently in that zone district, density is allowed, but the barriers to achieving projects are too high, i.e. the commercial space requirement. So this offers a pathway out of that requirement. I wanted to just briefly call out again the specific language that we propose around pets and allowing pets in the 2021 community survey conducted by the Chaffey Housing Authority. Well over half of the respondents that were housing challenged or housing strained identified the inability for them to find pet-friendly housing as a principal challenge in finding housing in general. So that's the sort of idea and the data that underwrites this idea that we want to promote pet-friendly rental housing, because we understand that that's a current barrier that our residents face. This is the same slide that we saw last time. These are examples. Obviously, on the left map, everything in red is highway commercial zone district. So conceivably, any of those properties could come forward and ask for this exemption and pursue a special use permit to build a standalone multifamily building. However, we've highlighted a few of the properties that either have approached us with this idea or that have specific parcels that we feel like are perfect examples of the suitability for this idea. Some of the properties highlighted on the east side of the highway have a current business built right along the highway and yet have large parcels of vacant land right behind them between those businesses and the railroad tracks. That'd be a great example of a parcel that might not be great for commercial activity, but that might be great for housing. And those would be eligible under this new proposal. So welcome any questions, but we are putting forward this proposed change through an ordinance.
Clarifying questions for staff. Cindy.
I have a question, and I don't know if I'm reading it right. You telling me that the 4th story is not an option any longer. It's been eliminated, but on page 101, 3, A, and B, it says the developer is eligible for density bonus to increase the height of the structure by 1 additional story or a 30% reduction in applicable parking requirements. And that is on page 101, and on page 110, I think it says the same thing. And it said the blue, if I'm reading it right, the blue is what we're supposed to be going by. And I don't know if I read it right or not.
If I may, the information in your packet, page 100 is the staff report. Page 101 is a copy of the Planning and Zoning Commission staff report. So that's how that went to the Planning and Zoning Commission. And that's the documentation that they had to move a recommendation forward to you. So it is still in there because that's what the Planning Commission heard as part of that staff report. I know it's a little bit confusing. There's a lot of paperwork that we throw at you.
So page 110 is also what was, does 110 also come from them?
Yep. So on page 109, you can see that this is a staff report dated November 3rd to the Planning Commission. And so 110 is part of that staff report to the Planning Commission. And so as you all know, any proposed change to UDC has to first be heard through the Planning Commission. So when Mark put together this staff report, he wanted to be sure to show you the sort of progression that this proposed amendment followed through multiple meetings.
That's my brain.
And it is confusing because the Planning and Zoning Commission did.
Because it did say blue was what
right
was new, and it was like, well, Okay,
That's part of the Planning and Zoning Commission staff report. It is not included within the specific ordinance that we have before you that starts on page 117.
so do we have a maximum height that is in the, did I miss that, where you have a maximum height?
It would align with the current, we're not proposing a change in that. So because we're no longer offering a density bonus, a height bonus, the height would be restricted by the current height limit of the highway commercial zone district, which I believe is 35 feet,
Is 35 feet.
which inherently restricts it to,
Okay.
3 stories.
Thank you for explaining that. Yeah.
Other questions? I'll open it up for public comment. If there's anybody, again, raise your hand if you are on Zoom. Press *9 if you are joining us by phone.
Not seeing.
Nothing there. Close public comment. Any other clarifying questions for staff? Okay. Communication trustees, thoughts? You'd like to change? Is that what you were looking for?
Sounds good. I feel like it's a great way to utilize space and properties that just have vacant land in town that they're not using. I think having apartments along the highway or probably behind buildings for a lot of them will be great. I think it's, there's a lot of sidewalks and everything is already in place there. Bike lanes. So.
And I think, as staff pointed out, a lot of those, if you were to try to force them to be a commercial retail underneath, and then they're basically landlocked, if you want to put it that way. They don't have highway frontage. So this allows them to do something with that property, and there's a good share of property on the backside of all those buildings.
The only issue I would see is the incentive to have less parking. I would wonder where people would park. They park on the highway. It's just something.
Open back up for staff. You want to comment on that, staff? What are the thoughts?
It's a reduction in the minimum parking. So it is lowering the minimum threshold that is needed. That's not to say that there isn't an opportunity for the developer to go and provide more.
Okay. And basically what it does for us is deed restriction. If they wish to go that direction, then we now have more control over how those apartments are being sold, developed, however you want to put it.
Yeah, and a couple other thoughts too. One is there's been a variety of studies on affordable housing developments throughout the state. Granted, that study was done largely in urban areas, but it did find that over 50% of the parking spaces at affordable housing complexes were unused. So we see this trend across the state and across affordable housing in general that they need to park. Not to say parking is not important. The other thought that I would offer is that especially for large multifamily projects of 10 units or more, not only would they need a special use permit under this process, they would also go through a major site plan review process, which in itself also requires a public hearing with the Planning and Zoning Commission, requiring full engineering, demonstration of not impacting neighbors. Those types of considerations and discussions would also be centered around.
Because it is special use.
Well, because there would be a site plan review process as well. So I think while a reduction in minimum parking may result in sort of a crunch in parking, we also have data points that show us or that give us a reasonable expectation that's not what it would need de facto. That we would have many opportunities to have input in that design process.
Yeah, kind of like collegiate commons, if we could, has a ton of parking, but I never see it being.
And part of the reason for that is often lenders, right? And that was the case with, collegiate commons, the LIHTC project, but other lenders, even in the private market, will look at parking ratios and require minimum parking ratios that have nothing to do with code. But it makes the lender feel comfortable that if somebody's renting an apartment, they will do so
Because there's parking.
So there's a variety of different things that would come with parking.
Any other clarifying questions for staff? Okay, close that. Any other comments, questions?
I have to bring up what I brought up 2 weeks ago. I think I appreciate the work. I appreciate what we're trying to do. I don't disagree that we're on the right track. But we just agreed to spend in the consent agenda $47,000 on a code audit that will be done in 7 months. I don't know why we would rush to approve this one or the next one that's coming up, when we can just couch them in a toolbox that is going to be reviewed in its entirety within 7 months. Where the business item B that's coming up, the code audit is cited as a reason to act now, but we're asked to disregard the code audit for these 2 items. And I don't understand why we would rush through this. Again, I don't think there's anything wrong with the proposals. I just don't know why we're piecemealing it rather than waiting for a comprehensive discussion on it.
Other comments? Go ahead, Libby.
I just, Kevin's comments about it utilizing land that right now it just is really sitting vacant. You know, if you look behind the Best Western and the stores, you know, or where you are, just there's a lot of land out there. And I think that's one of our problems, is that none of it has been really eligible for somebody to actually build apartment buildings. You know, the commercial idea is, it is difficult. I mean, why would anybody want to have a business hidden away? So I'm in favor of it.
Okay, any other comments?
Yeah, and I don't, I see your point, Dave, but I also don't see how an audit would change how the outcome on this would be. I feel like it's, personally, I see it's still a positive thing for people. So that's my opinion, but I appreciate you sharing that.
Anything, Norm?
No.
Cindy? I think your biggest concern was the height in that aspect.
Yeah, my next biggest issue is how fast it develops out and availability of water and how, but that's totally separate, I guess, from where I'm going. But yes, I truly appreciate the 3 stories. Thank you.
Gina?
Like with your comment, I actually see that same point of view, because it's like, well, we're going to do this audit, but then I also understand what Devin's saying with probably won't change much, but what is the rush? So, but I appreciate that comment as well. But I don't really have any questions or issues with proposed right now.
I would entertain a motion to either table, approve.
I'll make a motion to approve ordinance number 6.
Have a motion?
I'll second it.
Second, Fay. Further discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Trustee Fay,
Yes.
trustee LaCretzi,
Yes.
trustee Nyberg,
Yes.
trustee Rowe,
Yes.
trustee Swisher,
Yes.
Bobby.
No.
Thank you all. Let the record show 5-1 in favor. Thank you all very much. Next item, we'll jump right into should the Board of Trustees approve the adoption of ordinance number 7, series 2022, entitled an ordinance amending certain sections of Title 16 of the Buena Vista Municipal Code concerning single room occupancy. We'll hear from staff first.
Thank you again. So I believe, Philip, would you mind just? So single room occupancy, again, I have a couple of new slides in this presentation, but we're largely bringing back to you content from January 25th with some of your feedback incorporated as an option. So a little bit of a refresher, single room occupancy, or SRO in short, is proposed as a new use in our code. As you might remember or know, uses are definitions of things people can do in certain zone districts. So for example, a single family dwelling is a use by right in the R1 district. However, a large multifamily use is not allowed in the R1 zone district. So those are examples of other uses that are tied to zone districts, saying these things can happen by right, maybe they need a special use permit, or they're not allowed to happen in these various areas. So what staff is bringing before you is the option to create a new use that currently does not exist at all, and therefore either is not possible and or is happening as a non-conforming use, or a use that's not sanctioned by our code. So why are we bringing this forward? This stems from discussions that started last summer with the Planning and Zoning Commission, and this being identified as one of those tools in the toolbox that could lead to more diverse housing options. As we all know, not everyone either is interested and or can afford a detached single family home, or perhaps even afford an apartment if one's available. But some people might be very interested and will only be able to afford a room to rent. This use would create that possibility as a formal use in our code. And it also allows us the ability to more consistently enforce our current code and how it's being used in our town. When we have a non-conforming use that's not even addressed in our code, it's extremely hard to address that when the opportunity arises. And we can talk a little bit more about that aspect in a moment. From a practical standpoint, it's another type of housing that becomes available that currently is only available as an informal or unsanctioned use. It promotes flexibility. As we can talk about, this is both more flexible for tenants that can secure a single room on a month-to-month basis if they would like to be here for a season, or maybe don't need a full 12-month lease, or if they don't have 2 or 3 other roommates that they're trusting and willing to enter into a joint lease agreement with. And it also provides flexibility for landlords to be able to rent out each room and not have the risk of having an entire house sitting vacant, or having all the rent fall on a single occupant. It does promote seasonal housing, and it helps bring currently non-conforming buildings eventually through into conforming use, which really comes into play when we talk about life safety and building code issues around egress and ability for folks to safely live in rooms. I put together just super quick display that this is a topic that is could be conceivable and or applicable to multiple different properties in town, and is not the result of a single property or a single property owner's discussion. We've heard feedback from you all starting January 25th about the aspect that we were originally proposing that the Planning and Zoning Commission recommended for approval, which did include the ability for short-term rentals to be a part of this use. The table that's up here is the version that was approved or recommended for approval by the Planning Commission, and it represents one of the 2 ordinances in your packets tonight. So what we did was offered you an ordinance in your packets that does not allow short-term rentals at all, based on your feedback from January 25th. We also have the original ordinance as presented and recommended for approval by the Planning Commission in your packets, which does allow short-term rentals in this capacity as you see on the screen. A couple of considerations here. We know that all short-term rentals are subject to our licensing requirements as you all passed them in September of last year. So simply allowing short-term rentals as a possibility within this use definition does not give that as a license. That person would have to come and secure an available license and meet all the requirements therein. In addition to, so we're not granting something proactively here. We're simply making it available, but they still have to meet all the requirements of their short-term rental licensing. This structure does ensure a net gain in flexible workforce-oriented housing options. So what I mean by that is that, as you can see with the allowed short-term rentals, yes, there are some, how many SROs you're proposing to have, but we're also getting more long-term rental options added to our housing stock. So that's one consideration. And then the last one that I offer for you is that staff wants to propose and put before you tools that we feel like will be utilized, not tools that will sit on a shelf. That's true with highway commercial zone district change that you all just approved. We actually see utility in that. We see folks talking about it. We see that actually happen. That's true with the reasoning that we put short-term rentals in this discussion with the Planning Commission in the first place. Single room occupancy without any short-term rentals, maybe it could be used, but we see it being used more and therefore providing more net gain to our housing stock by having the ability for those owners to recoup or provide a return on their investments through short-term rentals. Again, subject to all the relevant licensing. So those are some of the considerations that staff had and that the Planning Commission discussed through actually several different iterations with the Planning Commission. When we first brought this before them, there was a lot of discussion on this topic and they asked us to revise the table because the original table we had, they felt was too generous with the short-term rentals. And so we revised it down to this before it got their approval or recommendation for approval. So just to close out the staff presentation here, as I mentioned, we have put two different ordinances in your packets. So we would ask you to either consider passing one of those two ordinances or simply, I guess, moving on from this topic in general. So with that, I'll cede the table, Mark.
Yeah, and then just would note that we did receive comments from the public, and I believe Paula forwarded those comments to each member of the board.
Thank you. And just to confirm, everybody had the opportunity to look at those. Okay, thank you. Other questions for staff or clarifying questions for staff? So my understanding is that at this point in time, code is silent on SRO. If this not adopted, they will be prohibited.
It would
am I correct? Now it would come into the code and say, okay, SROs are not allowed. Is that, am I correct in understanding it that way, or is that?
Yeah, the use doesn't exist today as a defined use.
Okay.
So if someone were to come in and propose something like this, we would say it is not allowed. And we have, I think, a couple of instances where this might be going on that we would have to make a decision on. And in our current code, we have the ability to create new uses or to interpret new uses based upon what they might act like. So the code recognizes that we probably don't have all the code uses that are out there today or in 20 years. There might be a lot of different uses. The code gives flexibility for creating a process for creating new uses. This is one of those tools to try and create that new use for this specific type.
And so an example might be both a current active non-conforming use, like maybe this is sort of happening in a current building in town, and this would give that building owner the ability to make it more formal. Whether they choose to do that or not is to see. It would also, to Mark's first example, we've had multiple folks on multiple different properties approach us with wanting to do something like this, adding to our long-term housing stock in a unique building that is on the market. And without the ability to do this, we've had to say, no, you can't do that unless you change the zoning of that property entirely. It's a much larger process.
So what would they change the zoning to?
In one instance, they would have to change the zoning to R3 to allow for
Gotcha.
the
Okay.
family.
Okay, so that would be that's what I was looking for, was a divider that said, okay, or not okay. And that's what I was looking for.
Yes.
Okay.
And similar to the idea of requiring commercial spaces under multifamily and highway commercial zone district that posed an insurmountable barrier and therefore projects just didn't happen. The rezoning process is similar in this case where, yes, there's a few properties that somebody could, if they really wanted to, pursue a rezoning process, but it's so arduous and uncertain that that's posed an insurmountable barrier.
And not to imply, but in that circumstance, they could possibly just go ahead and do it under the guise of, or just under the wire, just, and hopefully not,
Yes.
nothing happens, I guess the way to put it. Nothing happens.
Yeah, so there are many instances in town where people have done stuff that they were not allowed to do.
No.
And we've had to deal with those when those come up.
Right. Go ahead.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
Please.
I just kind of tying back to this conversation's been going on for a while to acknowledge that. We're aware of dorm-like scenarios in our town, especially for seasonal staff. And there was a desire to amend the code or come forward with a code proposal to make that a legitimate use so that we could actually guide people through how to structure that in compliance with the code, as opposed to being something that just does not have a definition in our code.
Right. As an example, to follow up on that, we created that seasonal camping in the industrial district for a couple of properties where that was occurring to try and
Accommodate.
create a legal process for that.
Jeff, are you on?
Yes, I am here.
I thought you got snowed out or something. I don't know,
No,
whatever.
I just didn't think you wanted to see my face staring at your screen all night, so I was just listening in.
Question, and I remember this came up and it's been quite a few years ago. It was implied if code is silent on a subject, the subject is allowed.
Yeah, no, basically in the zoning code, you basically have permitted uses, and those are the uses that are allowed. And if they're not listed as a permitted use or another type of use, they're not allowed.
That's what I wanted to hear. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Other questions? Go ahead, Libby.
I could be totally wrong on this, but I was kind of looking in the municipal code for definitions of short-term rentals and households. And I hit on section 1607 for short-term rentals. And it says that it can be an entire structure or two or fewer rooming units. And so I'm wondering if we could change this ordinance that we're discussing to say that you can only have two short-term rental units. Because otherwise I think we're violating what's in our code.
Would there be a contradiction there that she's bringing up?
So we also have definitions in our licensing section of the code as it relates to short-term rentals. So in that, there are some definitions that relates to ineligible structures. So it's not just the Unified Development Code, Chapter 16. There are other provisions in our code. With that, I'll shut up and let the attorney speak.
I'd have to read through your code more carefully to give you a good, thoughtful answer. I'm not sure I could just give you a quick one here. There's a definition of short-term rentals. Yeah, I'd have to read through your license. I just can't give you a quick answer on that, Libby. I apologize. I think Mark actually might be better informed on that.
Yeah, I printed out the part of it that had to do with the definition of short-term rentals, from that one code section. And maybe it's the wrong code section, but it says that a residential structure or portion thereof in which the entire structure or two or fewer rooming units within a single structure are made available to paying guests for 30 consecutive days or less, or dwelling units in the residential portion of a mixed-use structure located in the mixed-use zone district made available for less than 30 days. Bed and breakfast, hotels and motels shall not constitute short-term rental properties. But it seems like that's saying there's a two-room.
Yeah, that is true. And that's how we're licensing and holding the definition of STRs when we're applying licensing. Now, I just assumed that this ordinance would provide an exception to that definition. So Jeff, maybe my assumption was wrong.
Yeah, I want to look at the ordinance. Well, in the ordinance, unfortunately, amends several different provisions of your code at the same time. I mean, I guess I need to, I'm going to the ordinance quickly here. I'm just trying to change between screens 1 second.
And if I might offer, and Libby, I appreciate you bringing this up. I wonder too, if the aspect of the code you're looking at is that if I want short-term rent rooms in my own house, my primary residence, I can't get a license for more than 2 other rooms within my primary residence. So that's one context in which 2 would be a limit. However, if you're looking at other structures like in South Main or mixed-use Main Street, I believe the 2-unit limit, I'm looking at Joel, is not actually a limit.
And I thought they might be different because of their PUD.
Now, the licensing code allows for those zone districts to be higher.
And then the way I interpret it, an SRO is the short-term rental would fall under that. You would still only be able to have 2 in that unit, or well, in that circumstance, you're saying 3 if it's an 8-unit building.
That is the way that the current proposal is, but I think Jeff.
Yeah, I guess the question is, I guess, does the trustees want to not allow short-term rentals at all in these units? I'm just want to make sure I understand what the goal here is. Sorry.
I think what you're raising, the question is conflict in the code. That's the question you're raising at this point in time, because one part of the code says only 2 or less, and then we're proposing that maybe you can have 3, but our code on short-term rentals says only 2.
I'm thinking of it partly in the nature of compromise too,
Okay.
to cut it down to 2.
Oh, sorry. It's also rooming units too, not to however many STRs are allowed within a.
That would, to me, that's the division right there. It's not the same if I read it that way. It's just not the same. It just doesn't, they both don't mix this way. Because one, you're talking about a structure that has, let's say, 8 rooms, where how many houses are going to, it's a separate entity. And then also you're talking zoning. It's like kind of, I guess I can't put the 2 together the way you are. I don't see it that way, but I suppose somebody
Well, and
could.
I think we're trying to avoid having mini hotels, right?
And to be clear too, in the short-term rental chapter 6, the licensing, Mark alluded to this, that you have to have an eligible structure in order to get a license. Apartment buildings or multifamily buildings are not eligible structures. So no matter what the short-term rental, the ownership of that structure is, no one could get a short-term rental license for an apartment building because we don't want informal hotel buildings.
Just what you were alluding to.
I think it will, like Libby bringing that 2 rooming units in a place. If there's 3 allowed in the new code, then that will conflict with this part of the code. So
The 2 will conflict. And that's why I think what she's pointing out. And so then we'll go the direction that you implied there is kind of a compromise. Okay. And so your thoughts are, and actually food for thought, let's let that go. I'm going to open this up to public hearing or public comment. Philip, so let's see if there's anybody in public that'd like to make a comment, and then we're going to come back and discuss some more here. Raise your hand in chat, *9 on your phone. Jeff's contemplating the code.
Again, anyone in the public that's on Zoom, if you would like to speak as part of the public hearing, please raise your hand on the Zoom or type something in the chat box.
I don't see any changes, Philip. Do you?
I'm trying, but no.
We're really searching.
There's a
I close.
gentleman in the office, in the audience right there.
Oh, man, I mean, you're supposed to be on Zoom. Press *9, would you?
Out of turn.
Name and address, please.
Mark Jenkins, 314 South San Juan. I think this is a great tool to get some more rentals in our in town. I think we want to be careful with not allowing the STRs. I think that's a great incentive for somebody who might have a property that can offer, a few SROs, but still give them that option to have that STR, and maybe that way it can be affordable. So I think it's worth to maybe give up an STR to have more rooms, overnight rooms or SROs. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Anything else? Anybody else? Nothing there? I close public comment. Still interaction and staff is involved at this point in time. Go ahead, Gina.
Well, I guess my first question is, if we do allow the STRs, how will town audit this? I only say that because let's say you have 8 rooms. And let's say some of those long-term rental, the SRO portion of it, let's say some aren't filling, they're vacant. They're only allowed, let's say we compromise and go with 2 STRs. Are we going to assume that property man or owner will just leave those open? And like, how will we make sure that they're not getting filled with additional STRs? Is there a plan?
I would imagine we would rely on our usual STR compliance measures that we already have in place. They would not be eligible for more STR licenses.
Right.
But to your point, if there's a vacant SRO unit, I think we would have to rely on our normal code compliance with the STRs and business licensing.
Yeah, I agree with that. And to kind of drive home that point more, if someone comes in and asks about this, then that's how we say, all right, if this exists, here's this option. If it is a situation where they don't ask and we find out about it, then we have to deal with that situation. But if it's available, we then have that ability. If you look at the other requirements, one of the requirements is making sure that the building meets building code. So we have to get the building department involved to make sure that those rooms are safe to be habitable. They have a means of egress to get out of them. That is in fact what we had to do with an existing structure. We had a person renting 7 rooms and 2 of those rooms didn't have egress to meet the building code for safety. So there's a mechanism with the building department to do that inspection for compliance with the building code. And there's a zoning code, and then there's the licensing stuff. So there are components that will be handled by various different staff.
And I think to answer, I think your question, there are those that fly under the wire no matter what, and they will attempt to. It doesn't matter whether they're all ST or short-term rental or not. Some people are just gonna do it. And it's hard for us to police unless you want to spend more money for more code enforcement, or there's people out here you can hire to do that for you, to police and try to find them. I think that's, no matter what you do, that's risk. People are always going to try to beat the system, no matter what. I think what this and like what Mark's implying is that those that do apply, at least it's going to be up to code and it's going to be on the up and up. Could they try to fly under the wire? Sure. What do you do? It's hard to police anything, really.
Yeah, and just, I don't see it any different than the regular licensing and code enforcement process.
Okay.
Yeah. As an example, there's a house on West Main that the board in the past made, because the use didn't exist, made a determination that that's actually a multifamily house, 5 units. That the board took action in the past, which all this process, I discovered by going through all our past records. So they didn't have anything else to call it, so they called it a 5-unit multifamily building. The board did that, I think in the late 90s or early 2000s.
More.
Yeah, so, because this was one I was wrestling with quite a bit after when it first came out, so. So I've been trying to do my due diligence and doing lots of research and seeking other thoughts and just different things. So I actually had the opportunity, I reached out to Chief Morgan, because one thing that I was potentially concerned with was, you know, safety aspects of mixing, kind of having a maybe different culture of long-term plus short-term in the same space. And it was great to talk with him. I actually asked a few questions kind of regarding like what kind of calls come in for STRs, or if there are calls for SROs, and really like when they get a call, it doesn't really, you don't know if it's coming from an STR or not, they're just responding to the call. So it was kind of an inconclusive. So it's like, okay, so couldn't really go one way or the other on that. Another thing I did is I actually reached out to the town of Frisco. So I just wanted to get out of the valley, see something else, and talk to just a few people between their board and somebody in planning, see if they were doing the same thing. And it does look like they do commingle, and their best, I guess, they've seen what works best from my understanding from our correspondence was lock-offs. So they were essentially maybe the same building, but there was some way to have a separation, which I thought was interesting. I know that was also brought up in some of the information we all received, and I thought that was, you know, a good solution. I guess the last thing, I guess all that and just some other thoughts is like, I guess my main concern is we're trading SROs for STR. Like essentially there's room for the SROs, but then we're going to take some of that away for the opportunity for STRs. So we're kind of incentivizing for STRs or for SROs by giving STRs. And if you look at the comp plan, you go to goal 5, you know, prevent potential displacement of resident housing by tourism uses. So I see that as a conflict with goal number 5. And you could probably twist that around however you want to, but falling in line with that, that's where I see that as an issue. And I would ask, I totally understand the need to have that, you know, the SCR helps bring in a financial vitality for the property owner. I totally get that. It's very important. And I was wondering if maybe there's another way we can incentivize it without having it to be an SDR. And I don't know a ton of different solutions in that realm. I don't know if tax incentives or something, but that was just a thought. I'm just trying to, you know, poke different things here to see if there's some other way around it. But yeah, that's my homework, my due diligence. It's what I came up with. And I just kind of don't want to see more SDRs come in. I understand it will still follow under how many we're allotting, and giving away the opportunity of trying to provide that long-term housing. So.
And still, and you bring up a point there that would still be restrictive as to primary ownership as compared to non-primary if it's out of county, out of state. So those would still be restricted that way as to how many could be there. That building could be owned by somebody in LLC. That could top out in the first house, second house, and then no more are allowed. So, I mean, there's all kinds of different ways to stir the pot and see what's going to happen. I appreciate what Mr. Jenkins said in this respect is, and this is what I have felt for years, is more units. How do we get more units available? And I would like to say all or none, but I don't like that option. I want some, you know, can we get some somehow, some more somehow to make it feasible for some people to live? I think that's the way I look at it. All or none's a great option, but none is not an option. It just seems like you're closing the door. So that's a thought that's the way I look at this, only because I've dealt with housing for so long as a trustee and now as mayor. It's like, Gosh, here's an option that staff brought forward, and it's a nice option. Norm, what do you have? Thoughts?
Well, I don't like having any more short-term rentals out there. This SROs, I think, would benefit a lot of people seasonally. But as of adding to the short-term rentals, I'm against that.
That it? Devin?
Yeah, I still, I've definitely been thinking about this, since when we brought it up the first time, and I still really believe that this is something that's not as beneficial for the renters as it is as beneficial for the landlords or the owners. And the way I kind of see that is when you're renting in a group situation, which is something that I've done many times over the years. I've only rented, I've never owned. And I've rented in a group situation only a few years ago, is that you have a say in who lives with you when you're in a group situation like that. And I see this as a way where renters wouldn't necessarily have a say in who is living with them in a house. So I have a hard time being supportive of that, because it gives more power to the landlord and less power to the renter. And, specifically, if there are short-term rentals in that house as well, you have no say if what kind of people are coming and going from the property that you live on. So I see this as something that wouldn't, I don't see it as a way, like if this were not to go forward, I don't see it as a plus or minus in housing. I feel like the housing is still there. Just people have to work in these group situations instead of working through a landlord and single room occupancy. So I think, I don't really support this, because I feel like this makes it harder on the renters who live here.
You think though, how do they come up with the first and last? And then the damage deposit?
Yeah, and that's the only other thing, is that's the benefit that I see for the renters. You would hope that a landlord would work with someone with something like that. Given people are moving away or moving in, so those can kind of move around. But yeah, obviously that is the one beneficial to the renter, but I see all the other ones. When it talks about the place that you live and you call home, I make it, I'd like to have a little say on who's in my house, but that's how I see it.
Okay, Cindy?
Some good points.
Yeah, thanks.
They would have to apply and get an STR license. Is there an SRO license?
They would have to apply for a change of use to the SRO, which involves not only town zoning sign off, but also building department, as Mark mentioned, fire. So those are the other agencies that would be involved in becoming an SRO use.
It would be a change of use application.
Okay. So if we go with allowing STRs, you're always worried about developers having the best bang for their buck. If they can't fill it with SROs, they're going to fill it with STRs. They just wouldn't have to let anybody.
No different than anybody else.
Yeah, so I would tend to think that allowing the STR part, I'm still against it.
Dave?
Stuck on my last comment. I
Gotcha.
think that we're gonna have somebody looking at this from a number of different levels that's gonna provide real data, that we're not gonna say, I think this might happen, or I feel that might happen. I think that this could be included in the discussion coming up in 7 months.
And I had a conversation with, and actually it was a person that rented for me when I was renting, and I rented my basement. And they're now located in Leadville in a studio apartment. And coming out to go to work, this guarantees you don't know who you're living with. There was a gentleman in the front in his underwear watching his dog run outside. So who guarantees what? And this is an apartment building. This is not rooms. This is not this. That's not a lockout. It's not. This is an apartment. And you go, oh, who lives next door for the next 90 days, for the year, for, you know, there's no guarantees. That's the only thing I can say in that respect. You can't guarantee what you're going to move into. When you get into an apartment, you don't know. There's just no way you know. Just a comment. It like to say, if that's a hassle, I can't understand that one. Libby?
I would just hate to have us walk away from this. It feels like a couple of things. One is it's something that would be really valuable to younger people who can't commit necessarily to a 1-year lease, or can't come up with the first month, last month, and security deposit. If we have to let the short-term rental part go, let's do that. But I hate to just walk away from the whole thing. And I would prefer the short-term rental be in there. The other thing is that if we know that these exist, what are we saying if we don't, try to license it? It's sort of like short-term rentals. I mean, in the beginning, we knew that they existed, but we didn't have a licensing process. And we do, and I feel like we're capturing most of that information. And I think we could do that with this as well.
Jeff, where would that take us if if the trustees at this point decided not to allow SROs? What would that then push the town to do? Let me put it that way. Does that make sense? For enforcement purposes? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you ultimately would just have that type of use not being permitted, as it currently isn't permitted, and you would then decide what your enforcement priority is for that that issue, like any other code violation in the town. What's your priority and how do you want to enforce it? And you have people running stoplights, you have other violations, just no matter where you want to put your resources and how important it is to you. So, I mean, yeah, ultimately it would be the way it is now, and you could decide whether you want to get more serious about addressing those issues.
Okay, thank you, Jeff.
You're welcome.
Did you have anything?
I think that's, I appreciate that question, because I think if the board does go in that direction, I would like direction specifically on what do we do on situations that do exist like this. If you want us to pursue that through code enforcement or not, I would appreciate that.
I think that's that really becomes the next issue. Do you turn a blind eye? And then then you take obviously what legal counsel said, okay, so we don't enforce stop signs either, and we don't enforce, I mean, where do you stop that? You set a precedent. Mark, you had something?
Yeah, just to kind of relate back to why are we doing this now? These were 4 different distinct things that staff brought forward to deal with, to try and address situations that we know that might help. In the meantime, the code audit that we're looking at currently is an examination of our entire code, which is why it's going to take some time. We also recognize that this community come May 1 changes significantly. And so part of the reason why we had these 4 distinct ones was to potentially deal with setting up that ability should those opportunities occur this next summer season. So as a good example, the SROs, there might be some SROs that could occur this summer if this is passed. If we wait till September, that doesn't necessarily happen. Staff will do whatever the board says. It's just, these were 4 distinct minute things that we identified that might be a possibility that allowed for more housing options in town.
Do we have any other clarifying questions for staff?
Oh, I just had another comment regarding the 4 options. This is the only one that I think really affects the transient workers, the ones who are here in the summer who would otherwise be camping, up in the BLM or along the river. This is an opportunity for them to actually have a place that they could live.
Random thought.
Yeah.
If this was utilized, I might be regretting the statement, but this is mainly utilized for summertime, then is there an opportunity to maybe say, hey, it's all SRO, and then other time when it slows down, have at it more with the STRs?
You're really
I
getting
know.
into the enforcement side of it.
Okay.
How are you going to draw that? When do you draw
It was
that
just
line
thought.
and how are you going to do it? The only, and the comment I have to, let's just say summertime.
Yeah.
A person I know who works at one of the parts stores, lives in a trailer with he's a single dad. When it was 20 some below here, I don't know, a week or 2 ago. The next night they rented a hotel for $200.
Mhm.
Didn't have any place else to live and couldn't live in the trailer. So, you're forcing, and I guess the way I see it, you force people to do things that really aren't necessarily the most economical or the most feasible, but it's what's available. And sometimes you take what you can get. And at this point, that's all he can get. And so that's where he's stuck. And it's not saying that's right, wrong, or indifferent, but that's where he's at. And so you try to look at ways to, and that's still the way I look at it, it's units. How many more units can you have? So anyway, we've got, no more clarifying questions.
It's just a typo in the definition. Yes, sir.
What's that? Oh, a typo in the definition? That would be,
Just single room occupancy structures are not associated with educational facilities, so they are associated.
I don't know if you guys caught that. Are you looking?
Yeah, there's 2 knots.
Oh, 2 knots?
Next and 4, yeah.
It's a knot, it's a double knot.
We should add a 3rd knot to clarify that it's allowed.
Jump on that right now. Paula, can you update that for us? Thank you. I closed, so I believe trustees have had discussion. Obviously, we have an ordinance proposed. We have it proposed 2 different ways. We do need to accept either, table it, deny it, approve it, one or the other. It's your choice. Trustees' comments? Dave, you have something?
I'll make a motion to approve ordinance number 7 with the STRs.
SDRs. We have a motion on the table to approve with.
I'll second that.
We have a second, Fay.
You said with SDRs?
With. Further discussion? Let's take a,
Mayor, if I may.
Yes.
Clarification on the motion.
yes,
Is that with the limit of 2 to align with the code, parts of the code?
I think I got to defer to legal on that one. Yeah, whatever.
But Jeff,
Yeah, no,
Yes.
that makes sense. And I was just confused. I just had forgotten there were 2 alternate versions of the ordinance. So I would make it consistent with the current definition.
and I think that would be the safe way to go at this point unless there's a different clarification that can come up.
Yes.
The clarification.
You want to amend that? Dave?
I will amend that to match current code.
Or match current code, so that would be a maximum of 2. Gotcha, okay. And Libby, do you second
I do.
that amended? Thank you. Further discussion, and thank you very much, Philip. Roll call vote, please.
Trustee Fay,
Yes.
trustee LaCretzi,
No.
trustee Nyberg,
No.
trustee Rowe,
No.
trustee Wilkie.
Yes.
Forgot.
Oh, and
I vote.
Trustee Swisher.
No.
Okay, so that motion does not pass. Where do we go, Jeff? Another motion or table it or it's done?
It's
we
done
have
unless
to,
somebody else wants to make another motion.
Yeah, unless somebody wants to make another motion.
I'd like to make a motion to approve ordinance number 7 with no STRs.
We have a motion.
I'll second it.
Second, Nyberg. Further discussion? We'll go roll call again, please.
Sorry. Trustee Fay,
Yes.
we're gonna go all over because my box is now off. Okay, trustee Wilkie,
No.
trustee Nyberg,
Yes.
trustee Swisher,
Yes.
trustee LaCretzi,
Yes.
who did I forget?
Me.
Trustee Rowe.
No.
Okay, that motion passes 4-2. So staff is clear on bringing that one forward to us. That ordinance is done, so good to go.
Passes, yeah.
Thank you all very much. Thank you, staff. Next item is staff reports. Oh, never mind. I got lost there. Imagine why. I look down and go, wait a minute, we got business items? What's that? Where'd those come from?
It is staff report.
It is staff reports. You're on, Philip.
All right, so I would ask all of the staff reports to keep it concise. I know Public Works Director has some updates around Ivy League that might drive some conversation, so perhaps you can get that information and then continue that conversation in trustee staff interaction or however you would like. But the rest of staff, let's keep it short. For me, I just want to promote that CML is now starting their registration process for the annual conference, and we already have a few people signed up to go, so we'll send a reminder out and consider going. That's a great event coming up in June this year. The other thing I'll just point out quickly is I did want to recognize some outstanding staff efforts. We are getting closer and closer to selling the fire station property, which we're very excited about. And I wanted to recognize Chris Green, who's now Officer Chris Green with our police department, and Joel Benson for helping me navigate a pretty tremendous amount of work to dispose and sell equipment, clean out a very, very old building with lots of hidden gems, if you can imagine, and get that property ready to move on from. We did start a lease with Eddie Line that started last Friday. They're using it for storage, so we are receiving some revenue here until we close on the property April 15th. So thank you to staff for that effort. It's very exciting. You will be seeing an ordinance and the contract at the next meeting for consideration of approval so that we can actually close on the property in April. So that's the last step we have with that, and lots of other information there, but I'll stop there and take any questions if you have any.
Questions for Philip?
I have a question. The brush trucks being moved to the airport to help the airport. Is that the best use of that truck, or would it be better to dispose of that, get something that's more appropriate for helping the airport?
So we do feel it's appropriate. It has foam and water capabilities, which meets the definition of an ARF truck, which is something we identified a few years back at the airport.
Okay.
The price tags we were looking at back then were in the multi-$100,000 range for a, an ARF truck. This does meet those needs, and Chafee Fire agrees, and so we're going to utilize it for that. Public Works could also use it for spraying water on some of the dirt roads we have, some things like that. But we felt the best use was at the airport. We estimated that we could probably sell it for about $20,000 to $25,000. But again, to go buy another truck for the airport's going to be way more than that.
Right. Cool. Good. Awesome.
Any other questions for Philip? The only disappointing one was the MV decision. That's pretty brutal.
Yeah.
No penalty, no pain. What can I say? Next then, thank you, Philip.
Thank you.
Town Treasurer, Michelle.
Thank you, Mayor, trustees. My report is on page 124 of the packet. I have the URL links to the transparency website, the budget books, and then a wrap up of the sales tax numbers for the year. It's all fairly self-explanatory, and I updated all the previous months' numbers as well for the local versus remote. And then expenditures over $2,000. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to field those.
Any other questions for Michelle? Nice finish to the year.
Yeah, I did include the sales tax graphic that here, as well as on the fourth quarter. So just so that they're both in both places, but we don't have to talk about was going to talk about it in the fourth quarter recap. So.
Okay. Anything else for Michelle? Thank you, Michelle. Next is Planning Director.
Good evening again. My report is on page 127. Just a couple of quick highlights, and then happy to take any detailed questions. One, wanted to call attention to a couple updates with the Planning Commission's schedule. It has juggled around a little bit based on public noticing requirements and current project reviews. So we do have a meeting tomorrow, February 23rd. Planning Commission, there's a meeting on March 4th, which has been recently scheduled. And then there is a meeting on March 9th. So I just wanted to call attention to those kind of rescheduled Planning Commission meetings. You can see the other current projects we're reviewing, quite a bit in the hoppers at the moment. And one quick note as a reminder, a function that's allowed within our Unified Development Code is for site plan reviews of interest to the board to be what we see is called up for consideration before the board. So not that I'm encouraging that in any particular case here, but I just want to remind you all that that's one of the reasons we present you with a breakout of what types of reviews we have, is that you have the ability in our code to call up site plan reviews. So with that, I'm happy to take any detailed questions on any of these items.
Any questions for Joseph? You're off. Public Works. Uh-oh. It goes. John's on.
Hey, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Well, thanks. Yeah, rough report to keep it concise, but I can do it. I definitely do it. So quickly run through the water section here. I had a couple of trick numbers in here. Wanted to show the unaccounted at 20%, and that's And that's a number that is, indicated by the lack of production and the lack of billing. It usually comes up in the winter months. I wanted to throw a little bit of a curveball at this and kind of show you what the unaccounted actually would be if we factored in the Ivy League loss, and that's that 14%. And that also includes that 127,000 gallons that we accounted for the fill station, construction water, and fire hydrant flushing. Real quick, Ivy League. Staff went in there. Real quick, back up to last month, December, the leak didn't make any difference in the unaccounted water loss, but we did make some strides a couple of weeks ago. Staff got in there with Ivy League staff as well, and we did find an isolated a pretty large leak. So it was estimated still at about 8 to 10 gallons a minute. I probably shouldn't have done so much math on this. Just taking some guesses on the percentages of the improvement. I think time will tell, but based on the last couple of weeks trending, it seems to be somewhere close to a 10-gallon improvement. And so that 350,000 gallons probably improves too. And just for perspective, that comes out to, probably over 4 million gallons a year. So with the old meter in place, I think that that was kind of just misleading, because I don't think it was recording all of the water that was actually being served through that master meter. Anyways, there's some more work to be done out there, and we're fairly optimistic. I think acceptable time commitment with staff to do that. We haven't had much time involved in this effort at all. So we'll continue to do what we can do. But right now the leak has been isolated. And so this next, month of water usage, we should see an improvement. Held off on the water plant expansion project just based on the weather and the sensitivity of the work that we were doing out there. We were looking to do some subsurface utility investigating, just basically pinpoint where our pipes are at, and it's just a bad week to do that given the weather and the conditions, and also the fact that we moved up well 3 pumping testing for this week too. So if you haven't seen that, we're maybe going to have an ice rink for a couple days. We'll see. But the cool thing on that is I'm just going to go off the report just real quick and talk about well 3. So the last 14, 15 hours we've been pumping, and it looks like it's better production than what we had initially thought it was going to be. So won't talk too much more about that, but we should have some better data tomorrow. But I'm really optimistic of the opportunities that we're going to have for well 3. Real quick, put the street list project on here, broke down the chip seal locations and the chip seal costs and the asphalt paving and the asphalt locations. And I threw in there an East Main Street slurry seal project in the fall. If we have enough money to do it. I think it's a good solution. We can't really do a lot with that. Slurry seal is a more robust approach to seal coating. So it's very similar to chip seal without the aggregate. So it's a smooth surface, and Main Street's a good application for that. Anyways, if we have the ability to do that, it's going to be a fall project. It's just kind of one of those projects that we can't really do it in the springtime because the weather's too inconsistent. And we definitely can't do this kind of work in the summertime. But we'll keep you posted on that. And if you have any questions or any concerns, I'd like to get the RFP drafted up and get it advertised this week. So if there's any street locations that you're concerned about, or if you want to discuss that, I'm happy to do that. Dropped in the sidewalk trip hazard project as well, and nothing's changed from there. Kind of the same locations. We're going to focus on Main Street and high level traffic areas this year. And really excited to get some new staff in here for our Parks Department. And I'll cut it off there.
Question for Sean?
I have a comment question. It's under fleet where they're trying to get the truck that has been budgeted and planned for. Do we need to make an exception to where they don't have to make a dealership wait to bring it before us since
Thank you for
it's
asking that
always,
question.
Can we put it up?
it's been approved in the budget.
Yeah, it has. And so our procurement, man, mouth is not working. See, our purchasing policy, that's easy. Says 25,000 or above should be approved by the board, even if it is in budget. So we do have this dilemma where we would actually ask the board to consider adjusting that policy in these situations where, right, especially right now where the supply is very limited.
Yeah.
Between our police department getting their vehicles and our water department getting their vehicle, it's presenting a pretty significant challenge on the timing. And if it's already approved in the budget, it seems like it would be acceptable to be able to act faster than waiting for 2 weeks for a resolution and then going through that process. So it is something that we have been talking about between those departments that typically have to purchase new vehicles. So I appreciate the question and I'd welcome thoughts from the board on that.
Is that, and you're the PD also?
Yes.
An issue there also?
Yes.
And so we have a maximum amount that we put in the budget for both departments. Maybe Jeff would weigh in, but could we not make a motion to approve that up to those amounts so that you can act on those?
That's another way to go about it. Yes.
That's what I'm thinking. Why couldn't we just, we approve Public Works can purchase this truck up to such and such amount. Same with the police department, up to such and such amount. If it eclipses that or something, or if it's way over that, then obviously you have to hold off, but why not? I mean, that makes sense to me. Trustees, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I think
I mean, it's not like we're trying to get a heater. It's not an emergency, a heater for the community center, but thanks, Joel, by the way. Motion, trustees.
I'll make the motion that they can pursue the vehicles up to the amount that was budgeted without bringing it to the board again. Is that?
Yes.
Perfect.
Second.
Because they're losing out on deals. Yeah.
Well, it's not going to be easy. We have a second, Volpe. Roll call vote, please.
Trustee Fay.
Yes.
Trustee LaCretzi.
Yes.
Trustee Nyberg.
Yes.
Trustee Rowe.
Yes.
Trustee Swisher.
Yes.
Trustee Bogle.
Yes.
Thank you, Cindy. You beat me to it.
Thank you all.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Any other questions for Sean? All right, Rec Director.
Yes. Good evening, trustees. Yeah, glad to be here in second meeting with you guys. We have, we're really busy over here in the rec department. Earl's rolling on the special projects, Tucker's, extremely busy with programming, and Ben is, getting a whole bunch of special event applications and a lot of bookings. We have already over 200 bookings this year as of February 10th. And for reference, we had 465 in all of 2021. Most of those coming from our local government partners, the county for COVID testing, other Chaffey County public health classes, library bookings of our facilities. So extremely busy, but good news is that we have our new recreation program coordinator starting on March 4th. After a really thorough process, we hired Caitlin Miles to start as our recreation program coordinator. So really excited to have her join the team starting up here in a couple Fridays. Some less fortunate news that wasn't actually in the reports. We got the news pretty recently here, but we were actually not awarded the Land and Water Conservation Fund grant that would have funded the pickleball court and trail improvement projects through the disc golf course and the extension of the Walton Loop. And we are also not awarded the Colorado Parks and Wildlife Grant to replace the Whipple Bridge decking and improve the first 1,500 feet of trails. So as a department, we're kind of regrouping and strategizing on how we can still get those projects done without those two grants being awarded. But that was over $500,000 worth of grants that we were not awarded recently. But as you guys approved in the consent agenda, we have updated our rec board members and filled our vacant alternate position with Casey Martin. So excited to have a full rec board again. And then lastly, on the programming side, we have our Demon Diggers Youth Volleyball program that we partner with the high school with. We have 76 participants in that, which is almost our record, but we actually dropped second graders from the program this year. So considering we have one less grade, that's extremely impressive numbers. And then our adult co-ed volleyball leagues and our youth soccer leagues are open for registration. If anybody wants to play some volleyball or some youth soccer.
It was abrupt. I was gonna say, did you cut him off?
No.
Thanks, Shane.
I just have a quick question. Do they give you any reason why with the grants, just so we can figure out what can we do different next time, or maybe they don't tell you anything, I don't know, but out of curiosity.
Yes, we received kind of the initial judgment grading of them. The Land and Water Conservation Fund for pickleball and trails. We weren't particularly close on that project. Biggest things that they saw as hangups were referred to the park boundary and getting approval for that project, and the school board and BV schools having their baseball field within the park boundary. They saw that as a big concern. And for the trail, Whipple Bridge and Trail grant, we were extremely close in that one. They funded up to projects scored like 85 and higher, and we had an 83.5. So yeah, we were really close on that one. And a couple comments on that one really just referred to the social trails and how we were going to close those. But both of these grants, I thought we had really good applications, and Earl even did follow-up presentations that seek to answer the questions that they had. So yeah, definitely disappointing not to get those awarded.
Thanks, Shane.
You're welcome.
Any other questions for Shane?
I have a question. How did DPCA let 45 light bulbs get burned out in their gym? That is a lot of light.
It is. We actually went in there last Friday and made sure they had the correct light bulbs. They don't really have a full-time maintenance person. I think we're closer to about 40 bulbs being out, and it turns out there's probably going to be a couple ballasts we're going to have to help them replace throughout that process too. So not going to be fun, but hopefully we can just replace as many bulbs as possible and go from there. But yeah, they appreciate our help on the maintenance side because they don't necessarily have the full-time staff capacity for that.
I was kind of hoping you found a light switch off or something.
Unfortunately not.
Obviously it's disappointing news on the grants. We felt like we had a really, really strong case on both of those. And yeah, I appreciate Shane's summary on the feedback. That did not satisfy me. I was not really impressed with the
school side
feedback because they were addressed in the grant application. So we're actually scheduling a meeting with the grant program manager to have a more specific conversation about our applications and approach for moving forward. I think Earl and I will bring back to you some ideas on how we can keep these projects moving forward, because there is a lot of pressure and users usage of our river park. And we really have other projects starting to stack up that we would like to get to as well. So we think we actually have some options with moving some of our funding around and keeping these things moving forward. So yeah, just wanted to add that.
On something like this grant, is there an appeal process?
It's a very good question. And I would like to continue to put the pressure on this organization, specifically because we do have a CPW boundary around our river park that was tied to the original grant for the boathouse restrooms. And it kind of limits what we can do with that property. It's not that we would do anything other than open space and recreation, but we're abiding by their rules. And if we're not going to be able to get grant funding through them on a semi-regular basis, what is the point of that? So in light of that kind of conversation, I think a question about an appeal process is a good one as well.
I think that's a good point, because they put restrictions on you of how you and what you can do because of that boundary, and then now they're using it against you. Basically, is what they're doing. Oh, interesting. Good point, Norm. Anything else for Shane? We're good. Thank you very much. Have a good night. So I guess you might be good, trustee staff, unless Philip says go home.
I'll stick around.
Thanks. Next item is the Stackhouse Annexation. Should the Board of Trustees approve adoption of resolution number 16, series 2022, entitled a resolution accepting petition for annexation and establishing a date as the date of public hearing. We are going to establish that tonight if approved, correct? And request annexation of unincorporated territory located in Chaffey County. Philip.
Just real quick before I turn it over to Joseph, I do want to just clarify for the board and the public, we do have a couple of Stackhouse misspellings. One is in the actual agenda item. The correct spelling is Stackhaus.
That's why he brought up the
Yeah.
mistakes in the other one. I know it is, man.
So apologize for that, but I wanted to make sure everybody's aware we're talking about one thing, not two different things. And more importantly, the resolution on page 156 has the same misspelling in the title. It also has year 2021, so the year is 2022. So when the board gets to the point of considering that resolution, you may want to consider amending it as such. Now I'll turn it over to Joseph.
Now we'll go back to Joseph.
You want to go to my presentation?
You bet.
I'm back. Good evening again. So wanted to talk through what we call the resolution to accept the petition for annexation and to set a public hearing. So we'll kind of walk through a relatively brief and hopefully to the point presentation to make sure that we're all on the same page with what we're talking about here. Sorry. No, that's right.
Don't hit the wrong button. Oh.
There's the next one right behind it.
Hidden.
Because you're in.
I know I'm in an edit.
Back.
I'm close. There it is. Hey.
I would quit there personally.
Apologies.
All right, thank you.
All right.
So we are here tonight to discuss the acceptance of a petition for annexation for the subject property. So I wanted to be really clear, and I'm going to tee up Jeff to jump in if I misspeak. But we do want to set the expectations and the content of this discussion pretty clearly. The purpose of the discussion here tonight is to essentially establish whether the petition for annexation is what we call substantially compliant with state law that governs annexation petitions. And another way to say that is the application complete? Is a petition before us a complete petition? And does it allege or say that it is a complete petition? If the board does find substantial compliance, then the resolution accepts the petition or accepts that application and sets a date to actually consider the annexation itself. And so the next logical conclusion of that train of thought is to say that, one, if you all accept the petition and set a date for the public hearing, you are not bound to eventually approve the annexation. That is a different decision to be considered in that public hearing. This is accepting the application. Number two, I want to respectfully ask that we keep the conversation on the criteria of substantial compliance with the petition and not necessarily trying to weigh the merits of this annexation as they are proposed. That will be a discussion for the public hearing, should you set one. Propose to cut off your conversations, but I just want to set those guardrails to start that we are not in a public hearing. We are not weighing the merits of the annexation. We are asking, is this petition substantially compliant? So we'll dive into the petition acceptance criteria. Again, I will probably direct any legally focused questions to Jeff, but I will give a layperson's summation. In Colorado, annexations are governed under the Municipal Annexation Act of 1965, as well as the Colorado Revised Statutes, Chapter 31, Section 12, 101, 102, 103, 104, 105, maybe a few more up to 107, I believe. All those deal with how annexations are accepted and heard. The first criteria for you all to consider if this has been met or not, whether that therefore you should accept the petition, is whether persons comprising more than 50% of the landowners of the subject property, as well as ownership of more than 50% of the land area being proposed for annexation, have been the petitioners. So in this case, we have a single subject property with a single owner. And so we can say pretty clearly, based on the documentation provided, that this criteria has been met because 100% of land owners and 100% of the land area have petitioned for annexation. And I should say, since this is not a public hearing, please feel free to stop me anytime, ask questions. Number two, are what's referred to in state law as petitioner allegations. And as you can imagine, fancy word for what does a petitioner say or allege about their own application. So do they say that their annexation would be desirable and necessary? In this case, yes. The petition for annexation does allege that this would be desirable and necessary. Does the petitioner allege compliance with Colorado Revised Statutes, as I mentioned? And yes, the petition that has been submitted does allege that it is compliant with those state statutes. As you might imagine, based on my previous comments, your ability to question and verify, does it comply with state statutes, will come up in that public hearing, should you set one. And now we have microphones work. We're okay. Good. Yep. Compliance with ownership, as we previously described. Yes, we have compliance with ownership. And then have they made a formal request for annexation by the town? Yes, this has occurred. And then there are a variety of different details that are required to be in a petition annexation or an annexation petition. Do we have signatures? Is there a mailing address provided for all the signers to the petition? In this case, we only have one signer, one petitioner. Are there dates? Were there affidavits of circulator submitted? And then probably most graphically represented is, were there annexation maps provided, and did those annexation maps include the information required by state statute? And in this case, staff is pretty confident, along with our legal counsel, that these requirements have been met. Here's a representation. You had the actual annexation maps in your packets, but these were prepared by a professional surveyor that provide legal descriptions for the 2 annexations that are proposed. And as you recall from our January 11th meeting, this is proposed as a flagpole annexation. So technically comprising 2 different annexations that will be heard should you set a hearing and accept the petition together, and one would happen right before the other. So if you can imagine in your mind, the subject property is not currently today contiguous with municipal boundaries. Therefore, a section of County Road 306 is proposed for annexation as being the flagpole, and that's shown in the crosshatched areas here. You can see the dark bold line on the south side of 306, and then kind of cutting down the middle of the page there. That's the current municipal boundary, with the crosshatched section of 306 as the proposed annexation number 1 for the flagpole. If we flip to the second map, sorry, can you click back? We see the municipal boundary, the bold line has shifted to encompass what we assume has been annexed in that flagpole at number 1. And now the subject property is contiguous with the new municipal boundaries and is proposed as annexation number 2. So that's how these 2 are set up. So flipping back again, annexation number 1, municipal boundary as it stands today, and then the subject property after municipal boundary has been extended through annexation number 1. So if you all accept the petition and set a date for a public hearing, one of the things we will need to verify in that public hearing is, do each of these annexation parcels meet the eligibility criteria of contiguity of other criteria? For now, our question is, were the annexation maps provided, and do they contain the information, the details required? And the answer to both of those is yes. Wanted to provide a brief update and reminder on the timeline. As you remember, flagpole annexations come with a couple of unique requirements under state law. The requirement that we talked about in our acknowledgement of receipt of petition on January 11th was for neighbor or property owners that own property that is adjacent to the actual flagpole, that section of County Road 306, are required to get notice that a petition has been submitted 90 days prior to a public hearing. Now, as we acknowledged back in January, this presents a couple of quirks in the timing of things. This meeting tonight is where you will consider and potentially accept the petition and set a date for public hearing. That public hearing, should you accept the petition, has to be held within 60 days. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But because of this flagpole requirement to send special notice 90 days prior, that had to go out already, even though you had not had the opportunity to accept the petition. So if you were to for some reason choose to not accept the petition tonight, obviously there would be no public hearing. That notice would have been sent out about a public hearing that wouldn't happen, but it had to go out to meet state law. If that makes any sense. So I tried to represent steps that have already happened with that diagonal line through them. And today is highlighted in orange, where you would consider a resolution that would both accept the petition and set that public hearing date for what we're proposing is April 12th. Brings me to our staff recommendation. We do find substantial compliance in our view with the state criteria for accepting a petition for annexation. As I mentioned, state law requires that if you agree and if you accept that petition, you have 60 days from the date of that acceptance to set that public hearing. 60 days from today is April 23rd. So therefore, the last regularly scheduled public meeting that you all have on the calendar in which this public hearing could occur is April 12th. Hence our recommendation that if you accept the petition, that you set the hearing date for April 12th. with that, I will open up for questions. The action before you is, I apologize for not having number 16 in this slide, but Philip added it for it, is to approve with amendments or take no action on resolution number 16, series 2022. And just to be super clear, if you do take no action, the petition is automatically not accepted and no further action occurs at all. And so happy to answer questions. Obviously, Jeff is available to fill in the details.
Trustees. Motion.
I'll make
No
a
motion. Go ahead.
to approve resolution number 16 for the date of April 12th, 2022. And also to adjust the resolution number 16 is spelled correctly and series 2022.
Second that.
Second A. Further discussion? And understand this is just setting public hearing date. Roll call vote, please.
Okay.
Yes.
Trustee Fritzie.
Yeah.
Trustee Nyberg.
Yes.
Trustee Rowe.
Yes.
Trustee Swisher.
Yes.
Trustee Wilkie.
Yes.
Thank you all very much. Does your computer work that way, Alex?
Not as well as.
I was just wondering. I thought, well, that's pretty cool. I'll try that. Thank you all. Next item. Item B, apartment to condominium conversation moratorium. Should the Board of Trustees approve an adoption of ordinance number 8, series 2022, entitled an emergency ordinance extending the temporary moratorium on the acceptance, processing, and approval of any application for the condominialization. I like that word. Existing buildings within town.
You all can't get enough of me tonight. This memo can be found on page 157 of your packets. I did not prepare a fancy slideshow. My apologies. I'll walk through the memo as it stands. In background, or in summary, the moratorium that you all approved, which put a moratorium and prohibition on the acceptance, consideration, and approval of any conversion of existing buildings to condominiums. That was put into effect on August 24th of last year. It expires on Thursday this week. So we bring before you tonight the option to take action or not take action as you so see fit related to this topic. So as a quick reminder of the context of this discussion and decision back in August, this was considered in light of impending and sort of a trend of conversions from apartment buildings to condominiums, and then in most cases a loss of those long-term rentals to our local housing market. On August 24th, you also started your public hearing and consideration of short-term rental licensing caps and ordinance, and which you obviously moved and continued to September and passed those licensing caps. So I wanted to kind of bring that up to help remind everyone that this was done to give time for consideration of tools that could be employed to save long-term housing. There are a variety of different examples in town of current apartment buildings that could potentially become condos, not to say by any means that they will tomorrow. There are some on the market right now where the market price makes you hard pressed to imagine that they would not convert to condos because recouping the rental price or the market prices that they're listed at right now through long-term rents doesn't quite pencil. And so we do have reason to worry about a long-term housing stock. But that being said, you all put in place a meaningful capping system on short-term rental licenses. And I think that was a very proactive step that you took in September that came on the heels of this emergency moratorium. And I do think has a relationship with this topic. So in preparation for tonight, we put together, after much staff discussion, 2 different options for you. You're obviously welcome to come up with a third option as yet to be defined. And we really wanted to leave it to you to decide the next step here. So option number 1, as it's presented, is to let the moratorium expire. If you would like this to pursue this option, there's no action that's needed tonight. It will naturally expire on Thursday. Some of the implications could be that property owners could bring in applications for consideration of conversions of apartments to condominiums. Now, just because they bring in an application does not mean that that conversion will happen. There are many different review processes that goes through, including how they're going to demonstrate compliance with building codes that may have changed since the building was erected, but that would now need to be complied with, and other considerations. On the right of this table here, just wanted to provide a little bit of a glimpse into why we're offering this option. So the rationale there, as I mentioned, is based on this idea that with short-term rental licensing caps in place, there is a mechanism or a disincentive in place for folks to convert to condos and then immediately short-term rental. Just simply because there's a licensing requirement where the caps, especially for out-of-county owners right now, are very limited. Some of the considerations should you choose this option. We could experience a loss in some long-term rental units should they be successful in condominiumizing. So while there are only 4 short-term rental licenses left for out-of-county owners at the moment, there are quite a few more than that available for in-county non-primary owners. So there is a pathway for local folk who might want to buy an apartment building and convert it to a condominium to pursue short-term rentals. By no means, obviously, is that an exhaustive list of considerations or rationale. The second option that we put together is to extend the moratorium. Based on great counsel from our legal staff, our legal counsel, the ordinance that we put in your packets represents a 6-month extension, an emergency moratorium. So there's some strong advice from our legal counsel not to extend this for longer than 6 months. And the rationale behind making an emergency, again, is that if we do not, there's a 30-day waiting period between when you enact an ordinance and when it becomes effective. And so we would have a gap. And theoretically, somebody could come forward with an application for condominiumization within that time frame before the ordinance. The rationale behind this option is that because we are entering our code audit, we do need time to have that play out. And this topic will come up. It is not the only focus, but because the code audit is pretty comprehensive and looking at all our various policies, it will come up. And so maybe we will uncover a permanent solution to this. Maybe we won't, but the 6-month extension would allow more time. One risk therein is that we may not be ready with final recommendations within 6 months. And so maybe it expires anyways on October or on August 24th without a recommendation. So we're really kind of putting 2 options before you. Again, you could choose a third option if you'd like to identify one. We didn't want to necessarily promote one of these options over the other. So I'll stop there and happy to discuss or answer questions.
Trustees.
I like the idea of extending it. I would like to feel comfortable that we would have a solution in 6 months. It doesn't sound like that's comfortable.
It'd be pretty tight timeline.
So I think the main consideration there is the process for amending our UDC, assuming that we would identify a code solution to this that's in the UDC, requires a public hearing before the Planning Commission and a public hearing before you all. So that process in and of itself with the noticing requirements is at least 2.5 months from when we have a fleshed out recommendation to when we could conceivably have it before you all. It is conceivable we could identify a recommendation within the 6-month period, but our ability to actually get it through that public process and be ready for implementation is probably not realistic.
And to reiterate what Mark implied too, is this is a total code view, not just specific. Oh, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. No, it's everything. So it may not even come into priority soon enough to even, if you want to put it that way. Now, could it be extended another 6 months?
I don't think, Jeff, if you want to speak to that, but I think we've got to be careful about extending moratoriums too much. Thoughts on that, Jeff?
Yeah, ultimately a moratorium is justified because the town needs time to prepare and investigate, a new regulation. And you're basically required to be acting with due diligence and reasonable haste to prepare that new regulation. And typically, 6 months, a year, you can do it depending upon the nature of what you're looking at. That's justifiable. But if you don't do anything and you have a moratorium in place, and then you want to extend it and extend it again without having done anything, you basically don't have a good basis for the moratorium in the first place because you're not actually, pursuing new regulations or investigating what you could do. And so you're on shaky ground. So the longer the moratorium goes without real progress at a reasonable rate, the less justification you have for a moratorium. That's why we want you guys, that's why we advise all of our clients to pick a moratorium that's reasonable in length for you to get the work done and then proceed with the work. Don't just keep doing it and not getting it done because somebody could challenge it. You could have an issue.
Yeah, but we're government. Government don't move fast. Come on. Come on, Jeff.
It's good to be the king, but there are certain issues out there that the king can't do. So.
Okay, clarification now. I'll go in another direction that you brought it up here. STRs. So the defined out of county, did we group LLC? Okay, so it would have to be an individual in county. If it was an LLC in county, they would fall under that. What is there, 3 or 4 more?
Yeah.
Okay. So if it was an individual, they wouldn't be an LLC, so they would fall in county number, which is still got a lot of room. Okay. Yeah, just a clarification.
And to be clear that the distinction here, as we mentioned in our previous conversations, apartments are ineligible structures. So in county, out of county person buys an apartment building, they cannot do short-term rentals at all in any way.
Anyway.
So therefore, the only option they have to have short-term rental license is to condominiumize and change that from a single ownership on the whole building to multiple different owners of each unit, who could then each potentially pursue a license application for short-term.
Okay, and that process does not have to go through P&Z.
No.
Okay. Trustees, questions, comments? Motion.
I'd like to make a motion to extend ordinance number 8, series 2022 for another 6 months.
Okay. Got a motion on the table?
Second.
Second, Lucrezi. Further discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Trustee Fay,
Yes.
trustee Lucrezi.
Yes.
Trustee Nyberg.
Yes.
Trustee Rowe,
Yes.
trustee Swisher,
Yes.
and trustee Vogel.
Yes.
And we can only hope we've got a little bit more to
Yeah, can we
digest at that point.
ask staff for a timeline and their help on it?
See, and that's just what Philip was saying, try to prioritize, bring that one to the forefront if we need to, something like that.
If that's the case, that may come before the rest of the UDC code audit items. So I know there's
Keep that in mind.
got that concern, so that might come separate again.
Yeah, that's okay.
Righty, great. Thank you. Next item is the 2021 fourth quarter financial report. That would be Michelle, I think.
Yes, yes, thank you, Mayor, trustees. This report is on page 161 of the packet. And I just wanted to let you know that the next report is scheduled for May 24th, and that'll be the first quarter of 2022 report. So this is kind of a survey of the town class as far as the financial health. If you'll scroll down with me to the sales tax report on page 163, that's a visual depiction of how the sales tax receipts have grown in the last 5 years. And the numbers are all in the treasurer report as far as the increases. But where the surplus is almost $1 million over 2020. So, and that's what those numbers and those comparisons are in my treasurer report. So let's scroll down to page 164 to the balance sheet of all the funds. Pretty much everything is where it should be. I'd like to draw your attention to the investments in the water fund. We have $3.6 million in bonds, and then the $556,000 is actually in call of trust, which is almost as liquid as cash. So the all hazard response fund has a pretty decent cash balance, as well as the street fund and the stormwater fund. So everything is looking pretty good. Now this is all without regard to depreciation for 2021. The depreciation on this form is all prior year depreciation, prior year's depreciation. Now, if you will scroll with me down to the fund balance report on 165, you'll see that the unrestricted, unaudited fund balance, or the general fund, is right around $2 million. Now that is done without regard to, since we purchased the police station, the building in January, that money came out of the unrestricted fund balance. So it's really more like $1 million. However, we are starting to get money in from disposition of the fire station and the fire truck. And shortly, we look forward to selling the Belden lots. And so there's a lot of puts and takes to these fund balances, but keep in mind, we're still very healthy as far as what the unrestricted fund balances are. The restricted for debt services, those were all paid. That amount appears in the expenditures column. That's moved to the expenditures column. So that doesn't further, otherwise we'd be counting it twice. And then the water funds bond register of all the activity in the Pershing account for the bonds is on page 166. And again, that's that $3.6 million in the bonds. So then I've attached the balance, the budget report for the year ending 2021. And it shows where everything ended up. And again, it's unaudited, but it looks pretty good. So yeah, I will take any questions at this point. Philip, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, a lot of numbers to look at for sure, but I do want to point out that the way we collect and report our sales taxes, we're usually 2 months behind. I guess you could say it that way. Not a good way to say it, but so in this summary report right here, you will see that it shows fiscal activity for our town and county sales taxes at these numbers. That's not actually a full year total because Michelle, you probably say it better than I have, but you haven't accrued the November or December actuals back into the totals that are showing up here. Is that correct?
That's correct. All these reports are without regard to the accruals. I have not booked them yet, and I'm getting ready to prepare for audit, and I will be booking the accruals back into the previous year. And basically, accrual is just a fancy word for saying we're going to move money that we received in one year to another year, or we're going to move money that we paid from one year to another year. So we have a lot of things that we have expended or actually paid in 2022, but the liability was created in 2021. Those are accrued back to 2021. And then of course, with the revenues or the sales tax, those are attributable to November and December of 2021, but we actually received them in 2022. So we move those receipts back into the 2021. Now that I know all those numbers, I can be more precise in the accruals for the accounting.
So I just want to point that out because our unrestricted fund balance is actually going to be a little bit higher than this number shown here. So it's just end of year reporting is difficult because of those puts and takes, but it's almost easier to report this in the middle of the year. So, but just in case you were looking to see like, wow, because Michelle in her memo shows you specifically what the sales tax numbers are for the months. And so they add up and you see, well, we had $1 million surplus. Why are we showing
negative
we
numbers?
Just barely made budget here or we're negative.
Yeah.
That's
why.
Yep. Thank you. Oh, that's it for me.
More questions? Any questions? That answered mine, by the way. I mean, I was going, gosh, how come we're showing a negative? And it didn't, just didn't calculate. It's not QuickBooks.
No.
So much easier. Anything else? Are you good, Michelle?
I'm good.
When's the audit start?
April 10th, the week of April 9th is when they're going to be out for their first round of field work. We've already started communicating with auditors, uploading into their portal and stuff. So yeah, they're working on our case already. So
Okay. Thank you very much, Michelle.
thank you.
A promising year. All right, now we get trustee staff interaction. Norm.
I'm good.
Norm's good. Cindy.
Good.
Jeff.
I'm slow on the mute button tonight. I apologize. Yeah, no, I'm good. Thank you so much. I got a few things we're working on, but other than that, it's all smooth sailing. You're busy right now, though. That's for sure.
Yeah. Thank you, Jeff.
You're welcome.
Let me see. I'm 4 for 4 for no shows. Let me see. Who can I pick? Sean. Uh-oh. I'm really reaching out.
Hey, no, I'm good. Thank you, Mayor.
Thanks, Joseph.
Just a brief note.
Oh, you had the whole meeting and then you got a brief note.
I still want to talk. We are continuing conversations with Fading West on Carbon Street development. We are hoping to extend an invitation to you all for a factory tour conversation with them there. We're eyeing the week of March 14th. probably early in the week, probably some sort of afternoon. We will let you know as soon as we have confirmation. I just wanted to give you that heads up.
Thank you. Mark and Dave do not get nail guns, just say. Mark.
I just really quick, I would like to say congratulations to a couple of our wrestlers who took state this last weekend. So Camp and Moss won state, and the high school took 5th overall. But in general, if you add up all the points and compare to everybody in the state, we took 11th. So we did really, really good.
Really good.
Really good.
If you saw Camp, he pinned the state 33 seconds
Oh, wow.
in the final. That's insane to think about, 2 competitors that high up, and he nailed the guy 33 seconds. He just go, "Whoa." And it didn't look like a mistake, by the way. It was a good move. It was just a good move. He killed it. Nice. Thank you, Mark. Dave.
I've got one. I know tonight we had a liquor permit. Next week we have a liquor permit. I've heard more than one comment from the police department about over serving. And then Chief Morgan made that comment about tips tonight. I'm wondering if we can help them out by talking about what can be done to help the increase. We have increasing liquor permits and increasing police burden on the police department respectively. I'm wondering if we can have a conversation about tips and what that is, or what can be done to help these guys. Maybe we can incorporate that into business renewal or something. Is that just yammering again?
Is that mandatory at all, Paula?
That's hard.
That was
It's
a good
required.
idea, Dave.
It is required.
It is required.
It's their responsibility, a business owner it's their responsibility that their staff is trained appropriately and goes through this training. So it rolls back onto the employer.
Okay.
Okay.
So that does not need to, it's automatic.
Yeah, automatic, but
All right. And I just have heard, again, more than one comment about increasing incidents of over serving locally, and it's a little concerning.
Yeah, I think Paula does share directly with the liquor license holders about, especially after they go through an enforcement action, there is that reminder and direction back to, hey, you need to make sure you're having your staff obtain this training, things like that. I know Paula also shares those training events when they're held locally. I think COVID's kind of messed with that a little bit, but so I think information's going out there. I will say that it is at the board's discretion whether we renew those liquor licenses. It is an administrative process. But when we see repeated offenders, we would like to bring that back to the board potentially for consideration when they're going through their renewal. And I appreciate the question and kind of identifying that, because I know that there was some negative comments about the police activity. However, that's not something that's done in a way that overburdens business. It's actually a good check-in. And I think the way that our police department handled it, as well as through our clerk's department, they were essentially provided a warning this time. But I do appreciate you bringing that up, because it is hard when we get to the renewal time period about, does staff just process this, or what is that area? What is that line that would justify coming back to the board for consideration?
So I've been here for almost 8 years, 7 years and 10 months.
13 days, 12 hours.
Exactly. And we've never had a conversation come back of like, hey, you guys, we might have an issue with whatever establishment you want to talk about. So is that something that you would, I don't know how that would be handled, but if there is a repeat offender, would you bring that to us? Would you?
Can.
Okay.
What would be, and right here and now, policy discussion, 1, 2, what do you want to set as the limit to where it comes back? Is 1 not enough to have it come back in front of us, or do you want,
Yeah, second.
say repeat offender? That's more than 1.
Yeah, that's my guess, but I mean, I don't.
And so that would be a direction for staff. In my opinion, that's what you're looking for, is we want to see if there's problems out there.
One of the things, when I get a liquor renewal, I have Chief Morgan sign off on that form saying that, yes, he approves it, he tracks that. And when, about a year and a half ago, we had a couple of incidents where they did a liquor sting and some people were violated. And at that time, I was directed to put in my town clerk report when that comes up, so the board is aware. So if you go back to my clerk's report, in this packet, it states here that we renewed Mini Mart Slope and Jugs liquor license, and I also put in there on January 7th, 2022, Town of Buena Vista Police Department liquor sting. They issued a server citation for underage sale. So that's in the report. On that liquor sting, the two businesses that sold, Shop and Save and Loaf and Jug, those will also get warrants, or not warrants, but they will get a fine by the state liquor enforcement. Whereas the businesses, the restaurants and things, they got a letter of warning from Chief Morgan and things. And that's why you're seeing on all these new licenses, tips, because it looks like Philip just said, with COVID, that has been something that is either falling through the cracks or the employer is not taking the time to ensure their staff is adequately trained. So,
Trustees, anything that you see needs to be done differently, but that you would recommend to bring it to light or not, or, you know what I mean, forefront?
I think as long as Chief Morgan is checking off on it, I don't see a problem with adding it. I don't see an issue with anything else.
I mean, if it was a chronic and they
Yeah, if it was
were
chronic, then that would be brought forward, I would assume.
but yeah, then I would think it would be
You know.
automatically brought forward.
Yeah, but I don't see creating something like a 2 or 3 or 1 like strike thing without more information and more reasoning behind that. I trust Chief Morgan to be that person.
Okay.
Personally.
We could pass that on to him.
and if I also may share, when we've had issues of another business here in town, when the question came up, do we renew their liquor license and things due to activity? Well, we were told from the state, if the town denies renewing that license, it can be a different process than what the state. If the state goes ahead and thinks the license can be renewed without revoking it, whereas the town wants to pursue revoking it and not renewing it, that can also lead into some different procedures and things. That cost of revoking that license would come totally back onto the town. So.
Kind of sounds like what I'm hearing from trustees is just we're relying on staff to make us aware of somebody out of line, something like that. Makes sense.
I would think that if a business knew that after so many offenses that it was going to come before the board for review, that they would probably want to train their employees and pay attention a little bit closer.
As a bartender, I was always very vigilant about things like that. And, you know, as a person that works in the service industry, like, you don't want to sell to underage people or to get in trouble for that kind of stuff. Like, it's not like you're trying to sneak one over. And I think, you know, as long as people are hiring good, reliable people to carry out that's in the benefit of the business owner. So
Maybe you could ask Chief Morgan for an opinion on it. I mean, if he feels comfortable, you know, bringing a nuisance license, or whether he would prefer some tolerance, some metric somewhere. It doesn't need to be.
I think we'll go that direction because I'm hearing kind of all over the board here from trustees kind of.
Have more discussion as staff.
And what we're knowing about too. Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you all for that. Shane.
I just had one quick one. If you see the nice, well, you can't because it's dark out now, but if you saw the shiny, nice Ford Explorer sitting outside of the community community center there. That is the old fire department Ford Explorer that Sean and Jay at Public Works cleaned up really nice and threw a rec department logo on there. So we have a staff vehicle and to them.
Cool.
Making good use of equipment is the way I'll put it. Libby.
Buena Vista puts 1% of its sales tax revenues into a fund to support nonprofits in this area. And in the past, Salida has matched that amount. Now Salida is putting in essentially double what we're putting in. So we should have a lot more money to allocate. And there are 36 grant requests this year. So I've been reviewing those.
It's tough work, isn't it?
It is tough work.
It is tough work.
Mark knows about it.
Mark knows about it. That's why he passed it off to you.
Nothing, thank you.
That was good. Thank you, Libby. Gina.
I have three things actually. One is just a little update. A few weeks back, it's kind of like a little pet project for me. My obsession with trails and such, but I talked about some open mine pits in the Whipple system, and I finally got confirmation from the person I was talking to at the Reclamation of Mines and Safety, Craig Sinet, I think is how you say his last name, but they are going to backfill and safeguard this 30-foot deep hole. It's about 20 meters off of 304, which I think is awesome because of all the camping and recreation up there. It's high traffic. So I'm like, okay, one down, see if we can keep cruising along. Second thing, it's kind of random. And this comes from a place of just trying to get more involved in the community. You know, I've been here for almost 3 years now, but still want to meet more people. And so I was thinking, I asked Philip if this was, I don't know if legal is the right word, but again, because of my passion for the outdoors, I wanted to kind of host an idea of trails with a trustee type thing where twice a month, maybe Wednesdays, whatever, 7 a.m., go out for like a hike, walk, invite community members, just whether it's paved or dirt, but just, hey, it's fresh air, good exercise, chance just to have conversation, meet people in town. At first it's like, oh, this is just something that I would do, but then it's like, well, maybe the other trustees would want to, and I know we can only have 2 at a time. But anyway, I'm just throwing that out there as an idea. If nobody is interested, that's totally fine. I would like to do that. I thought maybe we could put it on my BV or something for a schedule. I don't know. Anyway, it was just a fun idea. And sorry, all the things tonight. And the third thing is I received an email from Kevin Malaji, which I may have butchered his last name, from the Upper Arc Tourism and Retail Sector Project, about potentially, you wanted to talk about doing some kind of partnership, potentially with Buena Vista, but it looks like he's talked to Jake Chevy and Whitney McGovern, I guess, from our chamber. But anyway, he wanted to meet at the end of this week if there was availability with, I guess we could have 2 trustees or town staff, but maybe looking for some advice on how to move forward with that conversation. But yeah, sorry, those were my 3.
Seems like you were nodding, you'd heard the name or
He's
something.
made contact with staff. I think Trustee Swisher also had an email interaction with them. I'm kind of pointing back to the EDC on that. It's not that he's not welcome to come speak in public comment or anything like that. In fact, that's what I would encourage.
Okay.
If he's got a specific ask of the board, it needs to come before before the board and public comment. But I really kind of look at EDC as our local county-wide partner on those kinds of topics. And maybe they can help take the lead on deciphering what's good out of that. Yeah, what applies to our local economy.
Okay, that sounds good. And I have a little town trustee interactions. I figured this would bring that up. That's all I have.
Good. Kevin?
Is there any news on rec from the 2 people? Recreational marijuana?
I thought you said Breck. What's going on in Breck? man? I don't know.
There is, sort of.
Sort of. Adam Paul with PCG 1, their 318 Charles Street is supposed to be in town tomorrow. If the board had given them if their business in compliance. The planning department has yet to see the subdivision documentation, so hopefully we can get clarification from Adam tomorrow. Scott Embry, he called a couple of weeks ago. They are having problems with contractors to do the asbestos abatement and to do the remodels. So you will be seeing in the near future to where they want to take a medical license. So what they're proposing is on a medical license, they go to just 21 plus. So they would no longer sell medical marijuana to anyone under 20 and under. And then that way where their current sales room is, they'll split that up to where a small portion will be medical marijuana and the other portion retail marijuana. Scott does not have a timeline when they will get that project done and when they will be open.
Okay, so then they wouldn't have to have separate entrances and whatnot.
They'll still have the entrance going in and then they'll have where you do your driver's license and things. But they'll still have one specific cash register and inventory for medical, another separate inventory and cash register for recreational. So.
Interesting. All right.
It's interesting times for everybody in that respect. Yeah, it really is. Michelle. Thank you, Devin.
I'm good. Tired.
No, you can't be. Philip.
Okay, I'm
All
not
right.
then.
Let's see.
It's all good.
We will, thanks, Michelle. We will be refreshing all of the trustee laptops. I guess they're surfaces right now. So Mike is getting, actually they're just arrived, their new systems. And we will be starting to swap those out potentially next meeting. So if you all will bring your system and your power cord with you at the end of the meeting, we can hand you your new system. Dave, keep yours until you're out of here.
I thought it was going to be a donation to the cause.
Just keep cranking until until April. But then Mark and Sue will be coordinating with you in March to get your systems to you and set up.
So I suppose you get new chairs too, right?
Yeah, they're real comfy. They roll around. Yeah. Finally, just bring back Ivy League. It's pretty late, so we probably don't want to dive in too deep to that. But I do want to reiterate that staff is hearing the board on that topic. We are taking it very seriously. Sean, I think, was a little too modest about how much time he and his staff are putting into that. They actually are putting in quite a bit of time. And they did find a substantial leak. It does not solve the problem, but we do anticipate the numbers getting better. Jeff and his team have been looking at the 1993 agreement with Joel. And I was hoping that would take the shape of a memo for tonight, but we didn't get that done. So we can talk about it next meeting if you'd like, or if you want to open it up to discussion tonight. Jeff is here and ready to talk about it, but I don't want to push the timing because it is pretty late.
And Philip, I did send you and Joel a copy of a memo that I drafted on this issue a year or so ago. So it's in your inbox. I didn't realize I'd done it. So that could be shared with the board confidentially too.
Okay.
So maybe that'd be best then to just move it to next.
I think probably a good idea.
Yeah. Then that way you could forward that memo and we'd have that for.
It's probably have to screen the memo though first because it's from Jeff.
I know it could say Lamar. You never know.
It'll be a mess, you know.
I haven't seen one of those in a long time. You know, a resolution that was, I don't know, in Lamar in 1812 and we were going to adopt it. Kind of cool. Anything else, Philip?
That's all I had. Cindy, were you about to say something?
No.
Oh, okay.
Two things. There was a comment about the franchise agreement. Philip, where did we end up on that? That we are not we're going to review that. 5 years annually?
Yes, so there are openers. We have a nifty word for it.
Limited reopeners.
Limited reopeners, which will be a defined list of topics that will allow both sides to open up the agreement on a every 5-year basis.
Yep.
One of those was around technology and innovation and whether there's a discussion to be had on that area. Franchise fee was another one. And I think there's a couple of other ideas. So
I remember that coming up in the conversation. But yes, that's right.
So
Jeff's office is currently drafting a full franchise agreement draft for you all to review, but the term sheet is clear that those limited reopeners would not call into question the overall agreement, but they would be opportunities to rehash some of those topics within the agreement. I just want to call it like the way it was drafted at the term sheet level was cognizant that a durable agreement of 25 years is beneficial, not trying to only have a 5-year agreement, but having opportunities to check out specific topics.
And that's what I wanted to reiterate for public comment in that respect. The other thing now, and this came up early in the conversation on the SROs, what do we want to do with enforcement? How are we going to, it's approved. So when we have our first one come in, do we have policy set up for how we're going to address that? Is Grant ready for that? Is obviously they've got to go through criteria for planning, building department. I'm just dropping that bomb on the staff at this time and say, okay, guys, we put it out there. So I guess plant the seed and see what we're going to do, because obviously the door is open. We'll put it that way because we know there's some out there. How are we going to address it? Is that a priority for trustees? For the board or for staff to pursue those who are actually doing SROs right now without any kind of agreement? I mean, that's.
I just to interject, I think that awareness of what has been passed is probably a good first step, and we can utilize our communication channels for that. I think there's some new and current conversations with potentially new uses of this coming online. I think that would be where the priority would start, those conversations. But yeah, how far do we go after ones that seem to be functioning?
Yeah, that currently are doing something without, quote, going through the process. Yeah. And the other thing I think would be kind of, and I don't know how feasible it'll be, but an update as to who many and how. You know, are we seeing an increase, if at all possible? I'd like to see if units become available. It'd be nice to know for sure. Or if it just stymies, you know, and doesn't change or something like that. Okay, cool. It's currently 2 degrees. If anybody wanted to know.
Yeah.
Wind chill minus something on Lake Michigan. I don't know. Got to be good. I would entertain a motion.
So
Opie. Second, Nyberg. Further discussion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Have a good night, everybody. Thank you, Jeff.
Yep, good night all. Stay warm.
Yeah.